The sun is a distant memory. Far above, waves crash and storms rage against coastlines. But down here, there is only a profound, vibrating silence. This is a realm where the fundamental rules of life on Earth are violently rewritten. At a depth of 4,000 meters, the ocean is a void of absolute, unbroken blackness. The temperature hovers just fractions of a degree above freezing. The pressure is crushing, an invisible weight pressing inward with the force of a freight train resting on every square inch of space. To human eyes, it is a barren wasteland, a liquid desert seemingly hostile to anything that breathes or bleeds. Yet in this lightless abyss, life does not merely cling to existence. It thrives. It mutates. It becomes something entirely unrecognizable. The deep ocean is the largest habitat on our planet, comprising more than 90% of the habitable space on Earth. Yet it remains the least understood. We have mapped the dry, dusty surface of Mars with greater precision than the floor of our own ocean. What lurks in these unlit depths challenges everything biology thought it knew about the absolute limits of survival. When submersible lights finally pierce this eternal night, they do not reveal a dead, empty world. They illuminate a gallery of monsters and marvels. Creatures with translucent skulls exposing glowing green brains, fish that fish for other fish with bioluminescent lures dangling from their heads, and ancient scavengers that can strip a fallen whale carcass to white bone in a matter of weeks. The deep sea is an evolutionary crucible. Here, the complete absence of sunlight, the agonizing scarcity of food, and the unimaginable physical pressure have sculpted flesh and bone into forms that defy surface-dwelling logic. Eyes grow to the size of dinner plates to capture rogue, stray photons, or they vanish entirely, evolutionary discards deemed a useless waste of precious energy in the dark. Stomachs stretch like dark balloons to accommodate meals larger than the predator itself, because a meal might only drift past once a year. Teeth grow so long and jagged that the jaw can never fully close, forming an inescapable cage for anything unlucky enough to be caught. This is not horror. It is brutal, beautiful efficiency. To understand why the deep sea breeds the strangest creatures, one must first understand the terrifying journey down. The ocean is not a uniform body of water. It is a layered architecture of increasingly hostile environments. In the top 200 meters, the epipelagic zone, sunlight penetrates freely. This is the ocean humanity knows, teeming with vibrant coral reefs, vast schools of silverfish, and the microscopic phytoplankton that produce half the plankton that produce half the oxygen in our atmosphere. But drop below 200 meters and the world begins to fundamentally change. You enter the twilight zone, the mesopelagic. The light here is incredibly weak, reduced to a bruised, fading blue. Colors begin to drain away entirely. Red wavelengths are the first to be absorbed by the water column. Brilliant scarlet shrimp at the surface becomes pitch black at 500 meters, perfectly camouflaged in the deepening gloom. At 1,000 meters, the very last scattered photons of sunlight are extinguished forever. Welcome to the midnight zone, the bathypelagic. From here down to 4,000 meters, the only light that exists is the cold chemical fire of bioluminescence. This is where the true physical weirdness begins. The pressure at this depth is staggering, reaching more than 100 times the atmospheric pressure at sea level. Imagine the weight of 50 commercial jetliners stacked directly on top of you. Under such immense forces, the air pockets inside human lungs would instantly collapse, and the very microscopic structure of our proteins would warp, fold incorrectly, and fail. Yet, life swims gracefully through this crushing, freezing dark. Deeper still lies the abyssopelagic zone, stretching down to a terrifying 6,000 meters. The Greek root of the word means exactly what it feels like: bottomless. Here the ocean floor is covered in a thick, suffocating layer of pale, fine mud, formed by millions of years of accumulated dead plankton, pulverized shells, and the dust of meteorites raining down from the world above. This constant slow-motion blizzard is known as marine snow, and it is the vital primary food source for the bottom dwellers. And finally, plunging like jagged tectonic wombs into the Earth's crust are the hydropelagic zones, the trenches. The Mariana Trench, the deepest scar on the planet, plunges nearly 11,000 meters down. If you drop Mount Everest into the Mariana Trench, its peak would still be hidden under more than 2 kilometers of crushing salt water. The creatures that inhabit these staggered depths are prisoners of their environment, locked in an endless, slow-motion evolutionary arms race where the stakes are absolute. They are the biological answers to a series of lethal questions posed by nature. How do you find a mate when you cannot see an inch in front of your face? How do you catch elusive prey when you cannot afford the energy to pursue it? How do you keep your own cellular machinery from turning to solid wax in the freezing dark? The solutions to these problems have birthed a menagerie of impossibilities. They are creatures born of starvation, forged by deep time, and illuminated only by their own living light. The deep sea does not just harbor the strange. The physics of the abyss strictly demands it. The architecture of an alien world. To comprehend the sheer bizarre nature of deep-sea marine life, one must first confront the invisible, omnipresent enemy that rules their world: hydrostatic pressure. Water is heavy. For every 10 meters you descend into the ocean, the weight of the water above adds another atmosphere of pressure, equivalent to the total weight of the Earth's atmosphere pushing down on you right now. By the time a submersible reaches the abyssal plains, a depth of roughly 4,000 meters, the pressure is approximately 400 atmospheres. Down the absolute basement of the world, the Challenger deep within the Mariana Trench, that number violently jumps to over 1,000 atmospheres. At nearly 16,000 pounds per square inch, the pressure is sufficient to instantly crush a standard military submarine like an empty aluminum can. When the bathyscaphe Trieste made the historic, terrifying first descent to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 1960, explorers Jacques Picard and Don Walsh heard a loud, terrifying crack at 9,000 meters. It was the sound of a thick plexiglass viewing window fracturing under the immense weight of the ocean. They continued their descent, knowing that a complete failure of the glass would result in their instant vaporization. Pressure does not just destroy metal and glass, it attacks the very building blocks of life. Biology on the surface relies on delicate chemical balances and the specific folding of proteins. At a microscopic level, high pressure forces water molecules tightly into the spaces within folded proteins, causing them to unravel and stop functioning entirely. Furthermore, the phospholipid bilayers, the thin, fatty membranes that form the outer boundary of every living cell, react catastrophically to extreme pressure combined with the freezing temperatures of the deep ocean. Under these conditions, the fatty acids in a normal cell membrane lose their fluidity and pack tightly together, transitioning from a pliable liquid to a rigid, solid gel. A surface fish instantly transported to the abyss would suffer cellular lockup. Its nerve impulses would cease firing, its muscles would freeze, and it would die in agonizing paralysis before the pressure even had a chance to crush its swim bladder. Yet, life finds a chemical loophole. Deep-sea creatures have fundamentally altered their own biochemistry to survive. To keep their cell membranes fluid in the cold, crushing dark abyssal fish incorporate a much higher proportion of unsaturated fats into their cell walls. These unsaturated fats have molecular kinks in their structure, preventing them from packing too tightly together, acting essentially like biological antifreeze. But the truly elegant solution lies in how they protect their proteins. The deeper a fish lives, the higher the concentration of a specific organic osmolyte in its tissues, a chemical known as trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO. TMAO is a chemical stabilizer. As hydrostatic pressure attempts to force water molecules into the proteins and tear them apart, TMAO acts as a microscopic scaffolding, binding strongly to the water molecules and creating a protective shell around the delicate proteins. It is the molecular equivalent of bracing the walls of a submarine. The deeper the fish, the more TMAO it requires to survive. This brilliant adaptation comes with a peculiar side effect. TMAO is the chemical responsible for the characteristic fishy smell of marine life. Because deep-sea creatures like the Mariana snailfish require massive, concentrated doses of TMAO to prevent their bodies from collapsing at 8,000 meters deep, if brought to the surface, they emit an overpowering, incredibly potent stench. The very chemical that keeps them alive in the abyss makes them notoriously foul-smelling to humans. The architecture of the deep also drastically alters skeletal structures. The extreme pressure and low temperatures of the bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones change the fundamental chemistry of seawater. Below a certain depth, known as the carbonate compensation depth, the water becomes highly corrosive to calcium carbonate, the mineral used to build bones and shells. The immense pressure literally dissolves bone. As a result, many of the deepest dwelling creatures have abandoned heavy calcified skeletons altogether. The deepest known fish, the ethereal Pseudoleparus swirei, discovered swimming happily at nearly 8,000 meters, looks nothing like the armored, scale-covered fish of the surface. It resembles a pale, translucent, slightly melted ghost. Its skeleton is composed almost entirely of soft, flexible cartilage, and its skull features distinct gaps to allow the brain to swell and shift without being crushed against bone. They are creatures of water, built to be entirely permeable to the environment that would otherwise destroy them. A deep-sea fish does not resist the pressure. It becomes one with it. They have no gas-filled cavities, no air-filled swim bladders to violently compress or expand. Their bodies are mostly composed of water and gelatinous tissue, materials that are inherently incompressible. If you were to bring a blobfish famously dubbed the ugliest animal in the world to the surface, you are seeing a creature suffering a catastrophic decompression injury. Down at its native depth of 1,000 meters, the water pressure holds its loose, jelly-like flesh tightly together, giving it the appearance of a perfectly normal, streamlined fish. It is only when dragged forcefully into the low-pressure environment of the surface that its tissues dramatically expand and sag into the miserable, gelatinous puddle captured in viral photographs. The blobfish is not ugly. It is merely designed for a physical reality we cannot endure. This reliance on a gelatinous, watery physiology is a recurring theme in the architecture of deep-sea life. In an environment where food is desperately scarce, building dense muscle and heavy bone requires a massive caloric investment that simply cannot be sustained. Jellyfish, siphonophores, and bizarre transparent comb jellies dominate the midwater column because their bodies are shockingly cheap to produce and maintain. They're roughly 95% water. By expanding their size using the very water around them, they increase their surface area for capturing microscopic prey without needing to eat more to fuel heavy biological machinery. They drift silently through the pitch-black, vast, fragile nets of living glass, perfectly adapted to a world where gravity is almost meaningless but pressure is absolute. The deep sea is an environment that forces life to abandon the heavy armor of the sun-lit shallows and embrace the soft, the fluid, and the strange. The anatomy of starvation. Below the twilight zone, the ocean is a desert of staggering proportions. The fundamental engine of life on Earth, photosynthesis, is entirely absent. There are no sprawling meadows of seagrass, no kelp forests reaching for the sun, and no microscopic blooms of phytoplankton to form the broad base of a food web. Every ounce of energy that exists in the abyssopelagic zone must fall from the sunlit world above. This slow microscopic rain of detritus, the marine snow, is a pitifully meager food source. It consists of dead single-celled organisms, fecal pellets from surface fish, and decaying organic matter that has been picked over, swallowed, and excreted multiple times before it ever reaches the bottom. By the time this pale gelatinous snow settles on the abyssal plain 4,000 meters down, only about 1% of the surface ocean's organic carbon remains. It is a world perpetually on the brink of mass starvation, and its inhabitants are shaped entirely by this desperate, unyielding hunger. In an environment where a meal might only appear once every few months, the ability to store energy and maximize every single feeding opportunity is the sole metric of survival. This ruthless selective pressure is engineered some of the most horrifying and efficient digestive systems on the planet. Consider the pelican eel, Eurypharynx pelicanoides. Drifting silently through the midnight zone, it appears as a floating, disembodied nightmare. Its body is little more than a tapering, whip-like tail attached to a jaw so disproportionately massive it accounts for a quarter of the animal's entire length. The pelican eel has abandoned the sleek, muscular bodies of surface predators. Speed requires energy, and energy is a luxury the abyss does not afford. Instead, it waits. When prey wanders too close, Its jaw unhinges much like a snake's, and its throat inflates into a massive balloon-like pouch. In a single, explosive motion, it engulfs an enormous volume of water along with its target, capable of swallowing prey significantly larger than itself. It does not chew. It simply locks its victim inside a fleshy cage and waits for its slow, highly potent stomach acids to do the work. The strategy of extreme gluttony is taken to its absolute agonizing logical conclusion by the black swallower, Chiasmodon niger, a small, unassuming fish rarely exceeding 25 centimeters in length. It possesses a stomach that functions like an aggressively expanding rubber sac. The black swallower feeds on bony fish, many of which are fast and heavily muscled. To survive, it cannot afford to miss. Once it secures a grip with its inward-pointing, needle-like teeth, it begins to walk its jaws over the prey, swallowing it whole. The stomach tissue is so profoundly elastic that it stretches until it becomes completely transparent, expanding to accommodate victims up to 10 times the black swallower's own mass and twice its length. The predator's heart and gills are literally pushed aside to make room for the colossal meal. However, this evolutionary triumph comes with a fatal risk. If the black swallower consumes a fish that is simply too large, the prey begins to decompose inside the stomach faster than the swallower can digest it. The resulting buildup of decomposition gases inflates the predator like a morbid balloon, forcing it violently to the surface where it ruptures and dies a victim of its own impossible hunger. Yet, even in this famine-stricken void, there are fleeting, chaotic oases of unimaginable abundance. When a 40-ton gray whale dies at the surface, its massive carcass inevitably begins a slow, silent descent to the abyssal floor. This event, known as a whale fall, is the deep-sea equivalent of a lottery win for the surrounding ecosystem. The impact of the leviathan striking the soft mud sends a shockwave through the water column, a chemical dinner bell that rings for miles. Within hours, the scent of decaying blubber draws the first wave of scavengers from the dark. Massive, lethargic, sleeper sharks, some reaching 20 feet in length, arrive to tear jagged chunks of flesh from the carcass. They are joined by thousands of hagfish, primitive, jawless scavengers that look like thick, gray eels. The hagfish do not bite. They possess 2 rows of raspy, keratinous teeth that they press against the whale. To gain leverage, a hagfish will tie its own body into a literal knot, sliding the knot down to its head to rip the flesh free. When threatened, a single hagfish can exude gallons of suffocating, fibrous slime in a fraction of a second, clogging the gills of any competing predator and ensuring its monopoly on the feast. This violent frenzy of consumption, known as the mobile scavenger stage, can last for months. But the deep sea is endlessly resourceful, and the feast is far from over when the flesh is gone. As the carcass is stripped down to a colossal, gleaming white skeleton, a new, even stranger cast of creatures arrives. The bones of a whale are incredibly porous and saturated with rich oils and lipids, presenting a massive reservoir of trapped calories. Enter Osedax mugoflorus, aptly named the bone-eating zombie worm. These bizarre creatures possess no eyes, no mouth, and no stomach. Instead, they secrete a highly concentrated acid from fleshy, root-like structures that dissolve the solid calcium of the whalebone. Once the bone is breached, symbiotic bacteria living inside the worm's roots break down the trapped fats and proteins, feeding the worm directly. For up to a decade, a single whale skeleton can support a thriving, hyper-dense metropolis of life. A brief, glittering anomaly of abundance before the ocean eventually reclaims every last molecule, and the abyss returns to its default state of quiet, starving desperation. Weaponized light of pressure dictates the architecture of the deep, and starvation drives its anatomy. Then darkness is the arena in which its most complex sensory wars are fought. Below 1,000 meters, the ocean is devoid of solar light. It is an absolute heavy blackness that surface dwellers can barely conceptualize. Yet the abyss is not blind, and it is certainly not completely dark. It is illuminated by the cold, silent explosions of living chemistry. Bioluminescence, the ability of a living organism to produce and emit light, is the defining language of the deep sea. More than 90% of all species living in the mesopelagic and bathypelagic zones possess the ability to glow. In a world without the sun, light is not merely a byproduct of biology. It is a vital tool for camouflage, communication, and murder. The mechanism behind this living light is an elegant chemical reaction. It requires two primary components: a light-emitting molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase, which acts as a catalyst. When these two chemicals mix in the presence of oxygen within specialized glandular organs known as photophores, they produce photons of light. Unlike the thermal light of a light bulb, which wastes most of its energy as heat, bioluminescence is near perfect, 100% efficient cold light. The evolutionary engineering of these photophores is astonishingly complex. Many deep-sea fish possess photophores equipped with highly reflective backing layers, crystals, precise gelatinous lenses to focus the beam, and even muscular shutters that allow the animal to blink, dim, or instantly extinguish its lights like a tactical strobe. In the twilight zone, where faint remnants of blue sunlight still filter down from above, bioluminescence is paradoxically used to become invisible. Predators in this zone, such as the hatchetfish, hunt by looking upward, scanning the bruised blue water for the dark silhouettes of prey passing overhead. To survive, the hatchetfish employs a strategy known as counter-elimination. Its incredibly thin, laterally compressed body is covered in silver scales that act like mirrors, while its entire belly is lined with dense rows of powerful photophores. These organs emit a perfectly tuned, icy blue light that exactly matches the intensity and wavelength of the downwelling sunlight. By illuminating its underside, the hatchetfish completely erases its own shadow. To a predator looking up from the depths, the fish simply blends into the background radiation of the surface, a ghost walking perfectly in step with the light. But as one descends deeper, past the reach of any solar photons, light transforms from a shield into a weapon. The deep-sea anglerfish, Melanocetus johnsonii, is the undisputed master of this lethal deception. The female anglerfish is a jagged, spherical lump of muscle and teeth, cloaked in skin so black it absorbs almost all ambient light. From the center of her forehead extends a modified dorsal spine, acting as a flexible biological fishing rod. At the tip of this rod hangs the esca, a fleshy lure packed with millions of bioluminescent bacteria. The anglerfish does not produce her own light. She farms it, providing a safe harbor and nutrients for the glowing bacteria in exchange for their illumination. In the pitch blackness, she pulses the lure, mimicking the erratic, twitching movements of a wounded shrimp or a drifting copepod. When a starving predator darts in to consume the easy meal, the anglerfish opens a jaw so massive it constitutes nearly half her body weight. The sudden expansion of her mouth creates a violet vacuum, inhaling the victim whole before its brain even registers the deception. The light was a lie, and the dark claims another life. The visual arms race of the deep sea has also produced the ultimate biological sniper, the stoplight loose-jawed dragonfish, Malacosteus niger. Because red light has the lowest energy and the longest wavelength of the visible spectrum, it is completely absorbed by seawater within the first few dozen meters of the surface. Consequently, almost every creature in the deep ocean has evolved eyes tuned exclusively to see blue and green light. They are entirely, fundamentally colorblind to the color red. A red object in the deep sea appears perfectly black. The loose-jawed dragonfish exploits this physiological blind spot with terrifying efficiency. Beneath its eyes, it possesses highly specialized, teardrop-shaped photophores capable of emitting a powerful beam of deep, ruby-red light. This requires a staggering biological workaround, as the dragonfish must synthesize a unique fluorescent protein that absorbs its own internal blue bioluminescence and re-emits it as red. Furthermore, it had to evolve a completely unique visual pigment in its own eyes just to see the very light it produces. The result is a predator equipped with a set of invisible night vision goggles. The dragonfish slowly sweeps its red beam through the darkness, illuminating the silver flanks and terrified eyes of prey that are completely unaware they are being bathed in light. They remain still, believing themselves hidden in the blackness. right up until the dragonfish's jaw unhinged and propelled forward on an intricate biological rail system slams shut around them. In the abyssal void, the mastery of light is the difference between seeing tomorrow and becoming someone else's survival. Forests of boiling rock. For centuries, a single, unshakable biological dogma governed our understanding of life on Earth. All living things, no matter how bizarre or remote, ultimately depended on the energy of the sun. Plants captured solar radiation to build sugars. Herbivores ate the plants, and carnivores ate the herbivores. Even the scavengers of the abyssal plains, subsisting on the slow drift of marine snow, were feeding on the frozen, decaying remnants of sunlit ecosystems. It was a closed loop, an ironclad rule of nature. But in 1977, a team of geologists aboard the submersible Alvin descended 2.5 kilometers down into the Galapagos Rift, a jagged tectonic fracture in the eastern Pacific. They were searching for geological anomalies, entirely unconcerned with biology because the textbooks dictated that nothing could live in such a toxic, freezing void. What their external floodlights illuminated completely shattered the foundational laws of biology and forced science to rewrite the definition of life itself. They did not find a barren expanse of basalt. They found a thriving alien metropolis, a dense, shimmering forest of life clustered around towering chimneys of solid rock that were violently belching black, superheated smoke into the freezing ocean. These structures are known as hydrothermal vents, and they form precisely where the Earth's crust is tearing itself apart. Along mid-ocean ridges, cold, heavy seawater slowly seeps down through microscopic cracks in the tectonic plates, descending miles deep into the crust until it encounters the blistering, molten magma chamber churning below. The water does not boil into steam. The crushing hydrostatic pressure of the abyss, hundreds of times greater than the atmosphere at the surface, physically prevents the water molecules from expanding into a gas. Instead, the water is heated to an apocalyptic 400 degrees Celsius, becoming a supercritical fluidous state of matter that is neither fully liquid nor fully gas, possessing the dissolving power of an incredibly potent acid. This superheated fluid relentlessly strips heavy metals, sulfur, and toxic compounds directly from the surrounding rocks. Buoyant and violently energetic, this toxic, mineral-rich soup blasts back up through the seafloor, erupting into the near-freezing ocean. As the 400-degree fluid collides with the 2-degree seawater, the dissolved minerals instantly precipitate out, crystallizing into towering hollow spires that can reach the height of a 15-story building, vomiting a continuous cloud of iron and sulfur dust known as black smoke. By all known metrics, a hydrothermal vent is one of the most hostile environments in the solar system. The fluid erupting from the chimneys is highly acidic, utterly devoid of oxygen, and saturated with hydrogen sulfide, a chemical so incredibly toxic to surface life that a single breath of it in concentrated form would instantly paralyze the human nervous system. Yet swarming around these chimneys, bathed in the shimmering, distorted water of the temperature gradient, the Alvin scientists discovered biological density that rivaled a tropical rainforest. The secret to this impossible ecosystem lies in a process called chemosynthesis. In the complete absence of sunlight, microscopic, single-celled archaea and bacteria have evolved the astonishing ability to harvest the chemical energy locked inside the toxic hydrogen sulfide. They absorb the lethal gas and oxidize it, using the resulting chemical reaction to bind carbon dioxide and water into complex sugars. These extreme microorganisms do not need the sun. They are eating the raw, molten geology of the Earth itself, forming the base of a completely independent, alien food web. The sheer abundance of this bacterial energy source has allowed vent creatures to grow to monstrous, unprecedented proportions. The most striking residents of these boiling rock forests are the giant tube worms, Raphia pachyptilla. They resemble a grove of pale, flexible pillars stretching over 2 meters in height, topped with brilliantly colored blood-red plumes that sway gently in the toxic currents. When scientists first dissected these colossal worms, they made a baffling discovery. The worms possessed no mouth, no digestive tract, and no anus. They had completely abandoned the act of eating. Instead, the interior of their bodies is dominated by a massive specialized organ called a trophosome, which is packed solid with billions of symbiotic chemosynthetic bacteria. The tube worm acts as a mass's biological life support system for its bacterial passengers. Its brilliant red plume is heavily vascularized, filled with a highly specialized, complex hemoglobin that tightly binds to both oxygen from the surrounding seawater and lethal hydrogen sulfide from the vent fluid. The worm's blood transports these chemicals directly to the bacteria in its gut, which in turn manufacture an endless supply of sugars and carbon compounds to nourish the worm. It is a perfect, closed-loop symbiosis, allowing Rifia pactilla to become one of the fastest-growing marine invertebrates on the planet, thriving in an environment that should instantly kill it. Even closer to the catastrophic heat of the venting fluid lives the Pompeii worm, Alvanella pompeiana. This remarkable polychaete worm constructs papery, gray tubes directly attached to the flanks of the black smoker chimneys. The Pompeii worm holds the record as one of the most heat-tolerant, complex animals on Earth because its tail end is thrust deep into the chimney wall where the superheated fluid escapes and its head extends out into the freezing ambient seawater. A single Pompeii worm can experience a temperature gradient of nearly 80 degrees Celsius across its own body length. Its tail is bathed in highly toxic water that reaches 80 degrees, a temperature that would cook human tissue instantly, while its head rests in water hovering near 2 degrees. To survive this thermal chaos, the worm is covered in a thick insulating fleece of specialized stringy bacteria. These bacterial colonies form a literal, living heat shield, absorbing the worst of the thermal shock and detoxifying the heavy metals that continuously rain down from the erupting smoke. The vent ecosystems are also fortresses of bizarre armor and specialized farming. Crawling among the jagged basalt rocks is the Yeti crab, Kiwa hirsuta, a pale, blind crustacean whose elongated pincers are covered in dense, blonde bristles that closely resemble fur. These bristles are not for warmth, they are highly specialized farming implements. The crab deliberately waves its hairy arms back and forth in the turbulent, mineral-rich water erupting from the vents. When it needs to feed, it simply uses a specialized appendage to scrape the living crop from its arms and into its mouth. Nearby, scaly-foot snail, Chrysomelon squamiferum, takes survival to an even more metallic extreme. Protect itself from the crushing pressure, the highly acidic water, and the crushing jaws of predatory vent crabs, this snail has evolved the ability to extract iron sulfides directly from the vent fluid. It uses these raw minerals to construct a thick, layered shell of solid iron plating and lines its fleshy foot with hardened iron scales. It is the only known animal on Earth that builds its skeleton out of iron metal, a living, crawling tank forged in the fires of the deep. But this localized, chaotic abundance is fleeting. Hydrothermal vents are inherently unstable. They can choke on their own mineral deposits or be snuffed out by shifting tectonic plates. When a vent dies, the ecosystem it supports collapses immediately, leaving behind a graveyard of white, empty tubes and forcing the surviving larvae to drift out into the infinite freezing void in a desperate, blind search for another sanctuary of boiling rock. Mating in the void, beyond the narrow, isolated oases of the hydrothermal vents, the deep ocean returns to its default state of staggering, incomprehensible emptiness. The bathypelagic and abyssopelagic zones represent a volume of habitable space so unfathomably large that the sheer mathematics of existence become a predator in their own right. Biological density is so incredibly low that a deep-sea creature might swim for years, covering hundreds of miles of pitch-black water, without ever encountering another animal of its exact size and species. This absolute isolation presents an evolutionary crisis far more profound than starvation or crushing pressure. Survival of the individual is meaningless if the genetic lineage ends with them. The ultimate test of the deep sea is the seemingly impossible challenge of reproduction. How do two creatures of the exact same species and of the opposite sex manage to locate each other in a lightless, freezing, featureless void spanning millions of cubic miles? The answer is the deep ocean has produced our desperate, extreme, and heavily reliant on perfectly tuned sensory arrays. In the upper reaches of the midnight zone, bioluminescence remains the primary language of courtship. While many species use light to camouflage or lure prey, others have developed highly specific, intricately coded flashes designed exclusively for communication. Much like fireflies signaling across a summer meadow, deep-sea lanternfish and dragonfish possess specific arrangements of photophores along their flanks and bellies that flash in precise, rhythmic sequences unique to their species. A male drifting through the dark will emit a highly specific pulse of blue light and wait in the silence. If a female of his species is within visual range, she will respond with a counterflash of the exact correct duration and intensity. But this strategy carries a terrifying inherent risk. Every time an animal illuminates itself in the dark, it broadcasts its exact location to every starving predator for miles around. Courtship in the deep is a high-stakes gamble, a frantic, flashing beacon in the dark that must result in fertilization before it results in fertilization before it results in predation. When visual signals fail in the vast, cloudy expanses of the deeper abyss, chemical warfare takes over. The water column is not entirely static. It is composed of massive, slow-moving currents that carry the microscopic chemical signatures of life over vast distances. Many deep-sea fish release potent, species-specific pheromones into the water, creating invisible chemical highways that can persist for weeks. The male deep-sea anglerfish is a creature fundamentally built for scent. Unlike the massive, terrifying females with their bioluminescent lures and cavernous jaws, the males of many anglerfish species are pitifully small, often no larger than a human fingernail. They possess no lure, no formidable teeth, and a digestive system that practically ceases to function once they reach maturity. Their entire existence is narrowed down to a single, urgent mission. Their heads are dominated by a massive, hyper-developed olfactory organ, allowing them to detect the faint drifting pheromone trail of a female across miles of empty ocean. Propelled by heavily muscled tails, these tiny males swim frantically against the current, following the chemical gradient as it grows stronger in the blackness. When the male anglerfish finally locates the massive silhouette of the female, what happens next is one of the most extreme reproductive strategies in the entire animal kingdom. The male does not perform a courtship display. He simply darts forward and violently bites into the female's flank, belly, or head. His jaws are lined with specialized, hook-like teeth designed specifically to lock onto her flesh and never let go. Once attached, a dark, horrifying biological alchemy begins. The male releases an enzyme that begins to dissolve the skin of his own mouth and the skin of the female where he is attached. Slowly, over a period of weeks, their tissues completely fuse together. The blood vessels of the tiny male intertwine and merge with the massive circulatory system of the female. He becomes a permanent living appendage, drawing all of his oxygen and nutrients directly from her bloodstream. As the fusion completes, the male's eyes degenerate and disappear. His internal organs, his brain, and his digestive tract all atrophy and absorb into his body. He ceases to exist as an independent organism, reduced to nothing more than a pair of gonads permanently wired into the female's hormonal system, ready to provide a continuous supply of sperm whenever she chooses to release her eggs into the dark. It is sexual parasitism, a brutal but perfectly efficient solution to the mathematical impossibility of finding a mate twice. For species that cannot rely on permanent physical fusion, the vastness of the ocean demands a different strategy to maximize the success of every rare encounter. Many deep-sea creatures, such as the abyssal lizardfish and various species of deep-water squids, have bypassed the problem of finding the opposite sex by simply becoming simultaneous hermaphrodites. They possess fully functional male and female reproductive organs at the same time. In an environment where finding another member of your species is a once-in-a-lifetime event, it is an evolutionary tragedy to meet a partner only to discover you are both males. By maintaining dual reproductive systems, any two individuals that cross paths in the abyss can successfully mate. They act as both donor and recipient, mutually fertilizing each other's eggs before drifting apart forever, instantly doubling the reproductive output of the encounter. It is a biological insurance policy against the terrifying scale of the void. As our deep-sea residents endure incredibly long, agonizingly slow life cycles, waiting decades for the perfect moment to reproduce. The vampire squid, Vampiroteuthis infernalis, drifting slowly through the oxygen minimum zone, employs a strategy of extreme patience. Unlike shallow water squids that breed once in a massive, exhausting frenzy and then immediately die, the vampire squid is iteroperous. It holds on to its eggs for years, slowly releasing a few at a time over a lifespan that is practically unheard of for cephalopods. It moves in slow motion, conserving every fraction of an ounce of energy, waiting in the dark, silent waters. The deep sea does not reward haste. It rewards efficiency, strange compromises, and a willingness to abandon the biological norms of the sunlit world, just to ensure that the genetic code survives another generation in the absolute dark. But as biologists began to look beyond the frantic struggle for survival, they realized that the deep ocean was not just a theater of bizarre adaptations, it was a museum of deep time, holding the ancient, living answers to how life itself may have begun. The Museum of Deep Time. Time does not flow in the deep ocean. It pools. On the sunlit surface of the planet, existence is volatile and chaotic. Continents drift and collide. Ice ages freeze the oceans and recede, and catastrophic asteroid impacts shatter the fragile atmospheric balance, violently resetting the evolutionary clock. The surface is a canvas of constant, traumatic erasure. But beneath the thermocline, protected by thousands of meters of cold, crushing water, the deep sea exists in a state of staggering physical permanence. The abyssal plains in the midnight zone have remained essentially unchanged in their temperature, pressure, and absolute darkness for hundreds of millions of years. This supreme environmental stability has transformed the deep ocean into the ultimate biological vault. It is a living museum, a dark sanctuary where evolutionary lineages that were utterly eradicated from the surface world retreated, adapted, and quietly survived the apocalypse. The most profound testament to this abyssal preservation was dragged to the surface in 1938, forever altering the field of evolutionary biology. Off the eastern coast of South Africa, a local fishing trawler hauled up a massive, heavily armored fish that possessed no right to exist. It was a coelacanth, scientifically named Latimeria chalumnae. To the scientific community, this creature was not merely a new species, it was a ghost. The fossil record dictated with absolute certainty that the coelacanth lineage had gone completely extinct 65 million years ago, wiped out in the very same planetary cataclysm that eradicated the dinosaurs. Yet here it was, breathing, its heavy, fleshy, lobed fins moving in a staggered, alternating pattern that eerily resembled a terrestrial animal walking across the ocean floor. By retreating into the dark, steep-walled volcanic caves of the twilight and midnight zones, the coelacanth completely bypassed the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. The anatomy of the coelacanth is a terrifyingly perfect window into the deep past. It does not possess a solid, calcified backbone like modern teleost fish. Instead, its spinal cord is protected by a notochord, a thick, hollow tube of pressurized fluid that serves as a primitive evolutionary precursor to the spine. Its skull is hinged in the middle, allowing the upper jaw to swing violently upward to create a massive vacuum for inhaling prey, a mechanical feature completely absent in modern marine life. Within its snout lies the rostral organ, a highly complex electrosensory gel matrix capable of detecting the faint, microscopic electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of hidden prey. The deep sea did not force the coelacanth to evolve rapidly. Rather, the extreme stability of the environment allowed it to perfectly maintain its ancient, successful architecture. It is a creature permanently suspended in evolutionary amber, proving that the deep ocean does not just create new monsters, it furiously protects the old ones. This phenomenon of deep time preservation extends to the apex predators of the abyss. Drifting sluggishly through the bathypelagic zone is the goblin shark, Mitsucarina austini, a creature whose lineage split from all other living sharks approximately 125 million years ago. It is a living phantom of the early Cretaceous period. To observe a goblin shark is to look at a predator built for a world that no longer exists above the waves. Its body is flabby and entirely lacking in the dense, powerful muscle mass seen in surface hunters like the great white. Its skin is a translucent, sickly pink, the result of oxygenated blood visible just beneath the surface, perfectly camouflaged in the red-absorbing darkness of the deep. But its most horrifying feature is concealed beneath a long, flattened, blade-like snout protruding from its face. When the goblin shark detects the electrical hum of a passing squid or crustacean, it does not swim forward to bite. Instead, a complex array of elastic ligaments and specialized joints instantly releases, and the shark's entire jaw physically detaches from its skull, violently rocketing forward out of its mouth. It is a biological catapult, snapping shut on prey in a fraction of a second before slowly retracting the writhing meal back into its throat. This extreme jaw protrusion is a mechanism of pure desperation, an ancient solution to the agonizing scarcity of food in the dark. It allows the goblin shark to capture fast-moving prey without expending the massive caloric energy required to accelerate its entire body. It is a perfectly tuned killing machine, designed 100 million years ago, executing its ancient programming in the silent, unchanging dark. The suspension of time in the abyss also manifests in the staggering, almost incomprehensible lifespans of its permanent residents. In the sunlit shallows, biological engines run hot and fast, resulting in rapid growth and rapid death. But the freezing temperatures and near starvation conditions of the deep sea aggressively slow down the metabolic rate of almost everything that lives there. Cellular aging grinds to a virtual halt. The Greenland shark, Somniosus microcephalus, regularly plunges into the freezing depths of the bathypelagic zone to scavenge and hunt. By analyzing radioactive carbon isotopes trapped within the crystalline lenses of their eyes, researchers made a chilling discovery. These massive predators can live for more than 400 years. A female Greenland shark swimming today likely was born before the invention of the telescope, moving silently through the dark, taking nearly a century and a half just to reach sexual maturity. Yet, even the ancient Greenland shark is an infant compared to the stationary architects of the deep. Clinging to the sheer rock faces of abyssal canyons are black corals and massive glass sponges, organisms that look like twisted, skeletal trees composed of pure silica. Because the rain of marine snow is so unimaginably sparse, these filter feeders grow at a rate of mere millimeters per decade. In 2012, researchers sampled a massive glass sponge belonging to the species Monoraphis chuni, which anchors itself into the abyssal mud with a single massive spicule of pure glass. Analysis of its growth rings revealed a lifespan that shattered biological comprehension. The individual sponge was estimated to be 11,000 years old. It began its life at the exact moment humanity was discovering agriculture at the end of the last ice age. It has sat in absolute freezing darkness for the entirety of recorded human history, slowly filtering atoms of carbon from the slow-motion currents. The deep sea is not merely a habitat, it is an archive. It is the only place on Earth where biology successfully defeated the relentless forward march of time, harboring creatures that measure their lives not in years, but in geological epochs, the architectures of sound. When the final scattered photons of sunlight die at the 1,000-meter mark, visual perception becomes a strictly localized phenomenon, limited to the desperate, flashing radius of bioluminescence. In this absolute void, a creature's world physically shrinks to the few meters immediately surrounding it. However, nature abhors a sensory vacuum. Where light completely fails, the physics of water provides an alternative, terrifyingly powerful medium for perceiving the abyss. Water is approximately 800 times denser than the air we breathe at sea level. Because of this extreme density, sound waves do not merely travel through the ocean. They violently propagate, moving roughly 4.5 times faster than they do through the atmosphere, and carrying their acoustic energy across distances that defy human intuition. In the deep sea, sound is not just a form of communication. It is a physical force, a highly weaponized tool for navigation, mapping, and absolute destruction. To understand the acoustic landscape of the abyss, one must first understand a specific, invisible layer hidden deep within the water column known as the SOFAR channel, or the sound fixing and ranging channel. Typically situated between 800 and 1,000 meters deep, this layer is defined by a unique intersection of freezing temperatures and rising hydrostatic pressure. Sound waves naturally bend towards regions where they travel the slowest. In the ocean, sound speed decreases as water gets colder, but increases as pressure mounts. At the depth of the Sofer channel, the speed of sound reaches its absolute minimum. If a low-frequency sound is generated within this specific layer, the acoustic waves are continuously refracted back and forth between the warmer water above and the high-pressure water below. The sound becomes entirely trapped, unable to dissipate into the surface or the ocean floor. Within the Sofer channel, a localized acoustic event, an underwater earthquake, a cracking iceberg, or the low-frequency moan of a baleen whale can travel uninterrupted for thousands of miles across entire ocean basins. A blue whale singing off the coast of California can be distinctly heard by another blue whale swimming near Japan. The deep ocean is not silent. It is a chaotic, deafening symphony of geological violence and biological communication, all trapped within an invisible acoustic highway. For the creatures that live permanently in the midnight zone, this constant background roar provides a massive invisible map of the surrounding world, allowing them to sense the approach of violent storm systems or shifting currents long before the physical water reaches them. But the true masters of deep-sea acoustics are the giants that plunge into the dark from the surface. The sperm whale, Physeter macrocephalus, is the undisputed apex predator of the abyss, diving past 2,000 meters to hunt in total darkness. To navigate and kill in a world without light, the sperm whale has evolved the most powerful biological acoustic system on the planet. The massive, box-like head of the whale is entirely dominated by the spermaceti organ, a colossal chamber filled with hundreds of gallons of specialized, waxy oil. When the whale hunts, it forces air through a pair of heavy, muscular lips located near its blowhole, generating a sharp, explosive click. This sound wave does not immediately leave the whale. It travels backward, bouncing off a parabolic, bone-dense reflector at the back of the skull, and then shoots forward through the spermaceti oil. The oil acts as a massive acoustic lens, focusing and amplifying the sound wave into a narrow, directed beam of terrifying intensity. The resulting click leaves the whale's forehead at a staggering 230 decibels. To put that into perspective, a jet engine at takeoff produces about 150 decibels, and sound becomes physically lethal to human tissue at around 180 decibels. The sperm whale's click is the loudest biologically produced sound on Earth. As the whale descends into the midnight zone, that fires a continuous barrage of these clicks, painting an incredibly detailed, high-resolution sonic map of the void. The sound waves race through the freezing water, strike objects in the dark, and bounce back as echoes. By analyzing the returning acoustic signature, the whale's massive brain instantly calculates the exact distance, size, speed, and even the internal density of its target. It can acoustically distinguish between a nutritious squid and an empty piece of debris from a mile away. This echolocation is not merely a flashlight, it is a weapon. The primary prey of the sperm whale is a giant squid, Architeuthis dux, and the even larger colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni. These deep-sea cephalopods are formidable monsters in their own right, armed with razor-sharp beaks and tentacles lined with swiveling hooks. A physical battle in the dark is extremely dangerous, even for a 50-ton whale. Marine biologists theorize that when the sperm whale finally closes the distance on a giant squid, it changes the frequency and intensity of its acoustic output. It unleashes a rapid, concentrated burst of localized clicks so physically powerful that the sheer acoustic shockwave ruptures the delicate internal tissues of the squid. The sound paralyzes the cephalopod, stunning it in the dark water, allowing the whale to smoothly inhale the massive creature without suffering catastrophic injury from its thrashing tentacles. The deep-sea hunt is a war fought and won entirely with weaponized sound. Consequently, survival in the abyss requires developing incredibly sophisticated stealth technology. Just as military submarines coat their hulls in an echoic tiles to absorb enemy sonar, deep-sea prey have evolved anatomical features specifically designed to remain acoustically invisible. The swim bladder, the gas-filled organ that surface fish use to maintain neutral buoyancy, is an acoustic liability in the deep. When a whale's echolocation click hits a pocket of gas, it produces a massive, brightly reflective echo, instantly revealing the fish's location. To avoid this sonic spotlight, Countless deep-sea species have completely eliminated the swim bladder from their anatomy. They rely entirely on gelatinous tissue and lightweight oils for buoyancy, because their bodies are composed almost entirely of water and lipids materials that possess the exact same acoustic density as the surrounding ocean. The whale's sound waves pass right through them without bouncing back. They are the phantom submarines of the abyss, drifting silently through the crossfire of biological sonar, surviving by ensuring that when the dark screams at them, they offer absolutely no reply. The methods of gigantism. There is a profound, seemingly illogical contradiction written into the biology of the deep ocean. The abyssal plains are defined by severe, chronic starvation. Every calorie is precious, and building biological mass requires immense, continuous energy. Logic dictates that the creatures of the deep should be uniformly small, aggressively conserving their limited resources. In the midwater column, this is largely true. Many mesopelagic fish are mere inches-long, fragile ribbons of muscle and jaw. But as the seafloor flattens out into the abyssal pelagic zone, the rules of biological economics violently invert. The deep ocean is not entirely a world of miniature scavengers. It is the birthplace of titans. This phenomenon, known as abyssal gigantism, produces invertebrates that dwarf their shallow water relatives to a terrifying degree, transforming familiar terrestrial shapes into heavily armored leviathans. To understand this strange scaling, one must look closely at the pale, crawling scavengers of the mud. If you lift a stone in a garden, you might find a woodlouse, a small, harmless terrestrial crustacean measuring a few millimeters across. Its deep-sea cousin, the giant isopod Bathynomus giganteus, is a creature of nightmare proportions. Scuttling across the seabed at depths of 2,000 meters, it can grow to 2.5 feet in length and weigh over 4 pounds. It is a massive, heavily plated tank of a crustacean, equipped with 4 sets of jaws designed to tear through the tough hides of dead whales and sunken sharks. When threatened, it curls into a perfectly spherical, impenetrable ball of pale chitin. But the giant isopod is not an anomaly. It is a mathematical consequence of the water it inhabits. The primary driver of abyssal gigantism is the profound, unrelenting cold. The water temperature at the bottom of the ocean hovers near 2 degrees Celsius. This extreme cold aggressively slows down the metabolic rates of cold-blooded invertebrates. In the sun-lit shallows, warmth accelerates cellular division, driving animals to mature quickly, reproduce early, and die small. In the freezing abyss, biological time is stretched to its absolute limit. Because their metabolisms are running in slow motion, abyssal creatures experience vastly delayed sexual maturity. They spend decades simply growing before their bodies shift energy into reproduction. Furthermore, the extreme cold directly affects cell size. As temperatures drop, the cells of many deep-sea invertebrates physically grow larger before they divide, leading to an overall systemic increase in the animal's total body mass. They do not just live longer, their very cellular architecture scales upward in the freezing dark. This massive growth is further enabled by the unique chemistry of deep, cold water. The size of marine invertebrates is strictly limited by oxygen. Because creatures like crustaceans and squids rely on relatively inefficient open circulatory systems or diffusion to breathe, they cannot grow larger than their environment's ability to supply them with oxygen. Warm water physically cannot hold much dissolved gas, but the freezing, high-pressure water of the deep ocean is dense with dissolved oxygen, carried down by massive, slow-moving global conveyor currents originating at the frozen poles. This oxygen-rich environment completely removes the biological ceiling on growth. An isopod can afford to become a giant because the freezing water easily penetrates its massive gills, sustaining a body size that would simply suffocate in the warm shallows. The abyss provides the exact thermodynamic conditions necessary to build monsters. The absolute pinnacle of this deep-water gigantism drifts silently in the freezing, violent waters surrounding Antarctica. The colossal squid, Messonychoteuthis hamiltoni, is the heaviest invertebrate on planet Earth, while the famous giant squid is longer, possessing spindly, whip-like tentacles. The colossal squid is an engine of pure, concentrated mass, weighing nearly half a ton. It operates in the bathypelagic zone, a predator built specifically to hunt massive Antarctic toothfish and clash with the 50-ton sperm whales that dive to kill it. The anatomy of the colossal squid is a masterclass in extreme biological weaponry. Its tentacles are not lined with simple suction cups. They are armed with swiveling, three-pointed hooks composed of razor-sharp chitin. These hooks can rotate 360 degrees, designed to embed deeply into the thick, rubbery skin of a whale and tear away massive chunks of blubber in the dark. But the most terrifying feature of the colossal squid is not its hooks, but its vision. To survive the absolute darkness and detect the approach of a predatory whale, the colossal squid has evolved the largest eyes in the known history of the animal kingdom. Each eye is the size of a large dinner plate, measuring nearly 30 centimeters across, equipped with a crystalline lens the size of an orange. This massive optical array is not designed to see shapes or colors. It is designed to capture the absolute faintest single photons of light. When a massive sperm whale descends, its massive bulk disturbs the thousands of tiny bioluminescent organisms suspended in the water column, creating a glowing, chaotic halo around the whale's head. The colossal squid's massive dinner plate eyes are tuned perfectly to detect this faint, shifting bioluminescent glow from more than 100 meters away. It sees the silhouette of its own death approaching in the dark, giving the giant a split second to either deploy its hooks or vanish into the blackness. The trenches of oblivion, beyond the sprawling, muddy plains of the abyssal pelagic zone, lies the final, most violent frontier of the ocean. The seafloor is not flat. At the very edges of the tectonic plates, where the Earth's crust is caught in a slow, agonizing collision, one plate is forced violently beneath another, tearing massive V-shaped scars deep into the mantle. These subduction zones create the hydrothermal zone, a realm comprising the deepest ocean trenches on the planet. To cross the threshold into the hadal zone, plunging past 6,000 meters deep into the Mariana, Tonga, or Kermadec trenches, is to enter an environment so hostile that even the hardened veterans of the abyss begin to vanish. The pressure here is no longer merely crushing. It is chemically catastrophic. Down in the trenches, biology runs headfirst into the absolute unbreakable laws of physics. The architecture of a trench fundamentally alters the distribution of food. While the abyssal plains receive a thin, even dusting of marine snow, the steep, sheer walls of the hadal trenches act like massive geological funnels. Earthquakes, frequent in these violent subduction zones, constantly trigger massive underwater landslides. These landslides sweep thousands of tons of organic sediment, dead fish, and surface debris down the steep slopes, concentrating it all at the very bottom of the V-shaped ravine. Because of this funneling effect, the deepest, most inaccessible points on Earth often harbor unexpected, highly concentrated oases of biological activity. The creatures that manage to survive the pressure do not just scrape by. They gorge themselves on the accumulated wreckage of the entire ocean above. However, the list of animals capable of surviving the hadal depths is shockingly short. As the submersible descends past 8,000 meters, a profound and terrifying change occurs. The fish disappear. The deeper you go, the fewer fish you see, until finally they vanish entirely. The current record holder for the deepest observed vertebrate is the Mariana snailfish, Pseudoleparus swiri, filmed swimming gracefully at 8,178 meters. This is not an evolutionary accident. It is a hard, mathematical boundary known as the fish depth limit. The reason for this barrier lies in the very chemical that keeps deep-sea fish alive, trimethylamine N oxide, or TMAO. As discussed earlier, deep-sea fish pump their cells full of TMAO to prevent the immense hydrostatic pressure from unraveling their proteins. The deeper a fish goes, the more TMAO it must manufacture to survive. But there is a lethal tipping point. As the fish accumulates massive, concentrated doses of TMAO, the internal salinity of its cells begins to drastically rise. Around 8,400 meters, the concentration of TMAO required to withstand the pressure reaches a fatal equilibrium with the salinity of the surrounding seawater. If a fish were to swim 1 meter deeper, it would require more TMAO to protect its proteins, but adding that extra TMAO would make the inside of the fish saltier than the ocean outside. A According to the laws of osmosis, the ocean would instantly begin aggressively pulling water out of the fish's cells to balance the salt gradient. The fish would literally dehydrate to death while completely submerged in water. Biology hits a chemical wall. No vertebrate can physically survive below this depth. Below 8,400 meters, the trenches are ruled exclusively by the invertebrates, the ancient segmented machines of the ocean floor. Swarming the bottom of the Challenger Deep, nearly 11,000 meters down, are the amphipods. These tiny, pale, shrimp-like crustaceans thrive where bones dissolve and fish wither. The most fascinating among them is Hirondelia gigas. When researchers baited traps at the very bottom of the Mariana Trench, they hauled up thousands of these amphipods and discovered a biological miracle hidden in their digestive tracts. Plant matter, such as waterlogged palm fronds and sunken driftwood, often funnels down into the trenches. Normal deep-sea creatures cannot digest wood. But Hirondelia gigas produces a highly specialized enzyme that perfectly breaks down the tough cellulose of sunken trees, turning the debris of tropical storms into a vital food source. But their digestion is only half the miracle. To survive the absolute maximum pressure of the planet, these amphipods have evolved a metallic shield. The sediment of the Mariana Trench is naturally rich in aluminum. Hirondelia gigas actively consumes the mud, extracts the raw aluminum ions, and chemically synthesizes them with organic compounds in its gut to create a thick, flexible layer of aluminum gel. It coats the entire inside of its exoskeleton with this metallic gel, preventing the crushing pressure from warping its shell and preventing the highly acidic calcium-dissolving water from destroying its body. It is a creature wearing armor forged from the seabed itself. Even stranger are the xenophyophores. Scattered across the walls of the deepest trenches, these organisms look like delicate, intricate sponges or pale, brittle corals, some reaching the size of a human fist. But they are not sponges. They are single-celled organisms. A xenophore is a massive, highly complex amoeba, an organism composed of only one single cell that has grown to monstrous, macroscopic proportions by simply refusing to divide its nucleus. They are living vacuum cleaners, slowly absorbing the toxic heavy metals lead, uranium, and mercury that naturally pool in the trench bottoms, isolating the toxins within massive localized crystal structures inside their single cell. In the absolute deepest, darkest, and most violently pressurized corners of the planet, life does not retreat. It builds iron shells, secretes aluminum armor, and stretches single cells to the size of a fist, proving that the ocean's imagination is infinitely darker and infinitely more resilient than our own. The edge of knowledge, we stand on the shores of a cosmic mystery, looking out over a world that is fundamentally alien to our own. The deep ocean is not a freak show or a collection of biological mistakes. It is a masterclass in the absolute resilience of life. We have mapped the entire dusty surface of the moon, and we are sending rovers to scrape the dry riverbeds of Mars. Yet we have physically seen less than 5% of our own ocean floor. The creatures we have encountered. The colossal squids armed with swiveling hooks. The dragonfish hunting with invisible red light. The ancient sharks swimming through centuries of absolute dark are merely the inhabitants of the shallowest edges of the true unknown. Every single time a submersible descends into the Hadal trenches, it brings back biological blueprints that shatter our preconceived notions of what is possible. The abyss forces us to confront a profoundly humbling reality. We are not the sole masters of this planet. We are merely fragile surface dwellers, clinging to the thin, sunlit crust of a water world that operates entirely without our permission, our knowledge, or our light. The deep ocean does not need the sun. It does not need us, and it will continue to foster impossible, terrifyingly beautiful life long after the continents shift and our surface empires fade. It is a realm defined by eternal dark, crushing hydrostatic pressure, and freezing famine. Yet it remains the largest, most vibrant, and most enduring ecosystem in the solar system. The creatures of the deep sea are not monsters hiding in the dark. They are the true, undisputed rulers of planet Earth. If you found yourself captivated by the silent, violent shadows of the abyss, the exploration does not end here. Our planet is scarred with extreme environments that push the boundaries of reality, from the suffocating unmapped depths of subterranean cave systems to the frozen, howling wastes of the Antarctic interior. To continue unraveling the absolute limits of life and the darkest mysteries of our world, make sure to subscribe and join us on our next expedition into the unknown. Leave a comment below telling us which deep-sea leviathan terrified or fascinated you the most. And until next time, keep looking beyond the surface.